Welcome again to Book and Adaptation, wherein I review a book and then critique its subsequent film adaptation. For entirely nostalgic reasons, I'm going to start with a childhood favorite that was later brutally raped by Hollywood. This is a pretty good example of book-first bias. Ooh, it's shiny. Ella Enchanted is a young adult novel written by Gail Carson Levine. I loved it when I was 11 and it's still a great read at 25. Here's the back blurb. At her birth, Ella of Frel was the unfortunate recipient of a foolish fairy's gift, the gift of obedience. Ella must obey any order given to her, whether it's hopping on one foot for a day and a half or chopping off her own head. But strong-willed Ella does not tamely accept her fate. Against a bold backdrop of princes, ogres, giants, wicked stepsisters, and fairy godmothers, Ella goes on a quest to break the curse once and for all. Now you could say it's a twist on the original Cinderella story, but really it just has Cinderella elements. Evil stepmother and sisters, fairy godmother, handsome prince, happy ending. But the actual Cinderella part of the story, with the royal ball and the midnight curfew and the glass slippers, all happens here in the last 30 pages. Everything else is Ella's journey, unless she spends most of the time isolated from the people she cares about and stuck with the people she doesn't. She still has the intestinal fortitude to carry on in her quest, the dogged determinedness to find a way to break the curse so she can be with the people she loves without endangering them. Let me say now that I am a sucker for strong female leads. I am totally hot for the warrior woman. And I don't mean just the physical badassery, I mean the brains to go with it. Ella might not be a fighter, but she's smart and she's strong-willed and strong-minded enough to take care of herself. In the most literal example of brain over brawn, at one point in her travels, Ella is captured by a band of ogres, and instead of fighting her way out of it, she uses her wits and her skill with languages to actually talk her way out of being eaten. That is equally, if not more, badass than swinging a sword around, and that's why I love her character. And the handsome prince of the story, Char, is a good match for her in wits and courage, and their friendship and romance is really wonderful. This is a fantastic novel. It's expertly written, and Levine does a great job of giving us the world and the story through Ella's eyes and experiences. The film adaptation, however, was an utter failure. They start by completely throwing out the plot. Yes, she still has the curse, but this great adventure of the quest to break it is thrown by the wayside in favor of some conspiracy to kill the prince plot. Anne Hathaway stars as Ella, and Hugh Dancy co-stars as Char, and Cary Elwes plays Char's evil uncle that didn't exist in the book and was added as a campy antagonist to the movie because there's no real concrete bad guy in the original story. It's all just Ella trying to break the curse, because that's what's the danger to her and the people she loves. I admit that this kind of conflict might be harder to do in movie format, especially as a more subtle concept that it would be difficult for kids to grasp, but a creepy evil uncle with a creepy evil mustache and a creepy talking snake is taking it a little too far. The only really threatening things in the book, the ogres, are turned into these big blue bald guys in the movie. They're about as threatening as one of those guys walking around in cartoon character costume in a theme park. Although I was at Chuck E. Cheese the other day and that giant rat really did freak me out. Thankfully, Ella is still a smart and strong-willed character, but unfortunately, smart and responsible Char is downgraded into kind of a dopey airhead who's happy enough to let his uncle run the show and not ask too many questions. The two of them meet and travel together, and Char becomes a somewhat more multidimensional character as Ella better acquaints him with the peoples and needs of his kingdom. Char vows to make changes for the better when he takes the throne, but of course creepy evil Uncle Cary Elwes isn't going to just hand over that power so easily. Thus we have the conspiracy to kill the prince plot. Creepy evil uncle learns of Ella's curse and all goes downhill from there. Now, I think the real reason this didn't work as an adaptation, and I don't mean specifically this crap movie, but at all, is because the novel's written in first-person perspective. That means a lot of the story is just in the protagonist's head, and her thought process, and her thinking. This can be done in film with voiceover, but it's rarely done well. In this movie, they give you Eric Idle as a sporadic narrator who jumps in every now and then to movie from scene to scene with a quick few verses of forced prose, and that's about it. What is especially problematic with first-person perspective in this case is the fact that the book's final conflict, the moment when Ella absolutely must break the curse in order to save her life and Char's, isn't with some external force like the creepy evil uncle actually outright ordering her to kill him. Her fight isn't against the actual act of harming Char, it's about the very thought of what might happen to him if someone found out about her curse, and then ordered her to kill Char. It's all internal dialogue and in her head and brilliantly written and not something you can put on screen. So instead, Ella does break the curse by somehow managing not to stab Char in the heart, but the actual climax of the movie comes some 15 minutes later when the creepy evil uncle tries to kill Char at his coronation using a poisoned crown and medieval ninjas. This is a terrible adaptation. All of that said, all of that aside, let's look at it as a movie. It's crap. It took 5 people to write this. That should have been a red flag at the beginning. Obviously, I'm not the target audience for this movie. It is meant for kids, but even as a kids movie, it doesn't live up to my standards. In any good kids movie, there's some subtle grown-up jokes thrown in here and there to keep us older people entertained if the rest is maybe a little too lowbrow. Personally, I'm not a fan of fart jokes. But there is absolutely nothing subtle about this movie. The plot is completely overblown, and the acting goes well with the writing, I suppose, but I feel like the whole thing is sort of spoon-fed to the audience. There's a sound effect that signifies when Ella receives an order, like we can't recognize the grammatical imperative. It goes like this. And yes, Anne Hathaway does that little surprise spasm every time. What really didn't work for me was the Renaissance fair silliness of this movie. The medieval Renaissance Hollywood sort of setting is good for the story because it is a swords and horses and magic kind of fairy tale, but they tried to put a spin on it and add some modern day anachronistic quirks, but it didn't really work. Is anachronistic even a word? Yes it is, and so is anachronistical, which is even better. I'm also probably a little bit biased against this modern day anachronistical quirk thing. 3 years before this movie came out, there was a movie called A Knight's Tale, starring Heath Ledger and Rufus Sewell, and a supporting cast including Paul Bettany and Alan Tudyk, the latter of whom is a personal favorite. I would highly recommend this movie. It's a lot of fun, and they did the same modern day quirks thing, but kept it a little more subtle, and I think Ella Enchanted was trying way too hard to do the same thing. They had a hand crank powered escalator. Another similarity between the two was with the pop song oriented soundtrack, but A Knight's Tale had a really solid original score by Carter Burwell, and then the songs they chose in addition worked really well with the scene and helped advance the plot. Like using We Will Rock You, joined by crowd members readying for a jousting tournament. In Ella Enchanted there was virtually no score, it was just pop songs and incidental music, and the songs didn't really even seem to fit, they were just thrown in there over scene changes and montages. Except they have Anne Hathaway, so of course Ella randomly sings Somebody to Love in the middle of the movie, which is sort of relevant because Char is there, but otherwise serves no real purpose. And then at the end, right after the wedding, the entire cast of the movie shows up again to do a chorus of Don't Go Breaking My Heart in the middle of the throne room. And speaking of weddings, one of my biggest pet peeves in really any storytelling medium is the underdeveloped romance. It drives me nuts. I need a more believable timeline. Admittedly, the 2-hour span of the movie doesn't give you a lot of time to cover it, but look at all the Austen adaptations. It can be done! This movie takes place over about 3 days, and when Ella first meets Char, she's disgusted by his willful ignorance, but come midnight day 3, he's proposing. It's especially angering because the love story in the book is just beautifully written over almost the whole course of the novel. The last thing I would say is that this movie actually had a pretty stellar cast. Anne Hathaway, Eric Idle, Carrie Elwes, Minnie Driver, Joanna Lumley, Hugh Dancy. What were all these people thinking? Final verdict, read the book if you don't mind something for a younger audience. Obviously I'm biased, but I still think it's worth the effort. Or if you are a younger audience, absolutely read it, and then just pretend the movie doesn't exist. Tune in next time for Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk.